At this point, you've probably played Cyberpunk 2077, and for many of you, you've probably beaten this game more than one time. Well, in this video, I am hopefully going to give you a reason to start yet another new playthrough, or even for some, reinstall the game outright. This is going to be thanks to a few mods that you can combine together to really change up your experience in Cyberpunk 2077, overhauling the meta and even how you handle combat encounters from the onset. And really, what I would describe this as is an incredibly fun overhaul of the game. At the core of all of this is going to be the mod level scaling and balance. One of the first things this mod is going to do is just change how enemies scale in Cyberpunk 2077. Have you ever noticed that once you hit the mid game and especially at the late game in Cyberpunk, enemies, or at least some of the enemies, just become really easy to handle? This is going to be due to how enemies scale in the game, which is a bit odd. By default, enemies will gradually scale with your level up until a certain point, but then by mid game, as you're now exceeding their level, the level differential will make it so they actually deal less damage to you and you deal more damage to them. So how much of a gap there is between your level and the enemy level will actually impact the damage output of both of you, which is kind of a weird mechanic, and that's why it just gets so easy against some enemies as you level up. So being 5 levels ahead of an enemy means you get to deal double damage against them, and this mod's going to partially fix that. On one hand, it's just going to make it so enemies will continue to scale with your level. Every enemy in the game will be the exact same level as you. So what this means in practice is a lot of those early area enemies will actually be tough fights even by the mid to late game. All of a sudden, the enemies you could easily one-tap before are surviving a lot longer and can even take you out in just a few hits. And there's some optional files you could download with this one to make enemies even scale above your level, to make the game even harder. But really, this side of the mod is just going to be a difficulty boost, and my favorite part of the mod is on the other side, the damage scaling option. This will give you the ability to fine-tune how much damage you deal against enemies and how much damage they deal against you. I know though, there's a ton of settings you could customize here, making it so you're an unkillable god or even that enemies are ridiculously tanky. What I love to do is turn up the damage amount for both me and for other enemies. So you could tune this to make Cyberpunk 2077's combat feel completely different, where just one shot or a couple of shots will take out most enemies in the game, but one shot will also take you out, which in actual gameplay means a complete change up on how you have to play. Every single weapon in the game is now viable. Things like LMGs become a dominant force that can deal a ton of damage very quickly. Grenades are imperative. Enemies are always going to be hiding behind cover, and it is genuinely dangerous to stick your head out, so lobbing a grenade over there to stun them or just deal with them completely is huge. And the biggest impact is your positioning and awareness of enemy positions. Getting flanked is brutal because an enemy flanking you can literally delete you in just a couple of shots. You have to actually think a bit more while going into combat encounters, and just making note of enemy positions becomes really important. But with enemies not only being scaled up but also dealing more damage, basically everything and everyone is a threat. The tension in combat is so much higher here, and for me, it makes things more tense and so much more fun. You're going to likely die way more often. You're going to have your hand on that quick save key, but at the same time, this mod doesn't really make the game harder in a sense. It just requires you to do a bit more prep while going into combat, and I think that makes the combat a lot more interesting. It can be more punishing, but it keeps the combat encounters interesting across the entire game. You of course can use things like quick hacks to blow through enemies, or just perch behind cover to deal tons of damage or remain stealthy, but I think what this will do is largely throw the old meta of the game out the window. There isn't going to be a ton of incentive to spec into more damage, and instead your positioning will matter. But this becomes a far more enjoyable experience with just a couple of additional mods. You could take what is a pretty fun experience to some of the most fun I have ever had in Cyberpunk. But one feature Cyberpunk 2077 is surely lacking is vehicle combat. Although, wait. What's that noise? Well, it's today's video sponsor, War Thunder, which does have vehicle combat and is in fact the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, featuring more than 2,000 vehicles. You can have a tank, a plane, a different plane, or even, best of all, boat. You'll be able to shoot down other people's planes, tanks, or boats as there are some insane combined arms PvP battles, but you could also shoot everyone else down with immersion. Vehicles in War Thunder are modeled down to individual components. Aim well and you could crash a plane with just a few shots. It features an insanely detailed damage model where can see which components specifically are getting hit and even dynamically feel the impacts of that damage. Like when somebody hits my engine, all of a sudden I could only fly at half speed. Very unfortunate. This is easily my favorite part of War Thunder, but it gets even crazier because this feature will apply to the full range of vehicles. Over 100 years are covered, from planes that look like they should barely be able to fly to some true modern marvels. War Thunder is available on PC, Xbox Series X, PS5, and even last-gen consoles if you still got one of those. And you're in luck, because you watch this video, you could use my link to play War Thunder right now, and you get some extras, a free bonus pack including premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters, and more. Looking back at Cyberpunk 2077, the first mod you're going to need to download to really upgrade this is Time Dilation Overhaul. What this will do is actually overhaul the Sandevistan options in Cyberpunk 2077. It'll rework some of the mechanics around this, like if you do have extreme time dilation, it's balanced out by your HP being decreased over time as you use this, or even as you trigger a time dilation, other enemies with good cyberware could actually move in that time dilation at a regular or even faster speed. But the real reason I think it fits in so well here is it'll add in a ton of really unique and fun time dilation cyberware for you to use. Like here, I'm using an operating system that brings time to a near standstill at just 5%. And you can see I'm weaving around all of these enemies who could basically one-shot me, but since I have such extreme time dilation, I'm able to do this, reposition myself, or even just take them out with the slowed time. You'll also notice my health is seriously depleting as I'm doing this. That's one of the new mechanics of Time Dilation Overhaul. Since I'm slowing down time so far, my body can only take so much. But playing around this way is so much fun. You get into cover, wait for your time dilation to come back up, then you could use it, reposition, take down a bunch of enemies, and return to a different set of cover. Or alternatively, if you time things very poorly, you can get absolutely destroyed by an enemy. I think Time Dilation Overhaul also makes melee builds a lot more viable and a lot more fun. You can go for a crazy high damage melee build centered around time dilation. Like with this particular operating system, each melee kill I get will actually increase how long the time dilation will last. So I can basically remain in this permanent slowed time state, able to maneuver around enemies, and clearly things aren't slowed down that much. Time is at 70% here compared to 5% where it was previously, but you're able to dodge around enemy shots as well as just get better positioning on them, and it's this really cool and fun way to play the game. And as the clock ticks down in your time dilation, you'll have some seriously epic gameplay moments as you try to maintain it, but there might be some of you sitting here looking at this and being like, okay, well, this just looks way too easy for me. You're just jumping around and easily one-tapping all of the enemies. And if you do want to up the challenge a bit more with these two mods in tandem, you can also download Scissors Difficulty Overhaul. This will basically add in a variety of settings that you're able to turn on or off to make the game harder. Mini bosses being much more powerful and actually like a boss fight. In general, it can make it so there are more higher tier and strong enemies spawning in the world, or disabling automatic recoil recovery on weapons so you have to recenter things yourself. But there are really a few settings in particular that I think have the most impactful changes for this particular mod list. One of which is going to be no shooting delay from enemies. What this will do is make it so enemies will immediately attack you and can actually chain attacks more often. By default in Cyberpunk, enemies have this weird cooldown on firing. If you turn the setting on, it'll completely remove that. One of the first things you'll notice is there's just going to be a lot quicker reaction times from enemies. They'll fire on you much more quickly. And again, there's a lower cooldown in between bursts of fire from enemies. At times, it just feels absolutely constant. Another pretty cool setting for this mod combo is you can make enemy shots have a larger impact, so it'll actually stagger you when you get hit by certain projectile types. I think this fits in really well here. Just a couple of shots on your character will take you out completely, so if you do let one of those through, it really staggers you for a moment, and you realize, oh wow, I was just hit in a major way. As well as immersive movement will make it so you are a bit slower and have a more realistic character weight overall. You're not going to have as much of that crazy free jumping, and it's a bit more predictable in the way you move, and your weight will move with you. But if you truly want to have a more immersive experience and make the game harder, this mod also has a setting for disabling enemies popping up on your minimap. So the only way to see enemies is if you were looking at them previously or if you use something like ping. Considering how important enemy locations are with this mod combination, this becomes huge in gameplay. You really have to manually track them or use cyberware to aid you. And if all of that still somehow wasn't enough, another good one is Toxicity. Toxicity is a pretty cool mod that will limit how often you can heal in a set time frame. The lore behind it is basically that as your using your inhalers in Cyberpunk, you're actually generating toxic buildup, and there's going to be a certain cooldown period. So as you build up this toxicity, you're going to have to let it dissipate from your body before you can heal again. And it basically removes the ability to spam healing items in Cyberpunk. You can only use a certain amount in a certain time frame, and you have to kind of strategize to space them out. Considering how often you're going to end up healing on a high damage playthrough, this will actually turn up the tension even a bit further, because you might be sitting there with about 100 HP and realize, okay, I don't actually have any healing options anytime soon. My toxic buildup's way too high. So you have to get through that situation and deal with it, and I think it makes for a really fun gameplay experience. And what I think is the perfect icing on the cake to make all of this come together for a great and interesting playthrough is vehicle combat. And I don't honestly even mean the actual vehicle combat side of this mod where you can fire from vehicles and enemies can fire on you, but rather the other component of this mod where enemies are able to call for backup as you attack them. So now as you're assaulting an enemy base, they're able to call for backup, and I think actually turning up the difficulty so they call for backup pretty often and can make that call relatively quickly creates some interesting experiences. Because although yes, your damage is much higher, you can take out enemies quickly, you also have to actually act fast now, otherwise more enemies will be on the way. And as we talked about earlier, enemies flanking you with this mod combination is brutal, and I think it overall adds in a pretty interesting and fun component to all of this. But thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. You could use my link below to play War Thunder on PC, Xbox, or PlayStation, and get a special added bonus with premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters, and more. Plus, you'll get the eternal satisfaction of seeing exactly how you just made that tank blow up. But overall, I would say these mods together create a really fun way to experience or really re-experience Cyberpunk 2077. Of course, a lot of the story components will be largely untouched, but that combat in between will be completely different. It's going to force you to play in a very different way, or at least some of you. If you're already going for a super stealth or super netrunner build, then yeah, sure, things will be somewhat similar, or you can play in a similar way. But I really think the fun of using these mods is it makes you play in a way that you maybe didn't before, using things like LMGs or relying more on Sandevistan as opposed to just a regular cyber deck and quick hacking. And for me personally, it led to me trying different things in the game, but also having some really tense and fun moments. This is probably some of the most fun I've had filming one of these mod videos in a long time. Either way though, hopefully you guys found this one informative. Hopefully you download some of these mods and continue to enjoy Cyberpunk 2077 because it is an awesome game. But with that, I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.